A young girl disappears from her bedroom in the middle of the night. No broken windows, no forced entry, just gone. For years, her mother lived with questions, ... and silence. Until one day, she found her husband's old shirt, stained with blood, and hiding a secret that would change everything. This is not just a story about a missing girl. It's a story about the mother who refused to stop digging, and the darkness she uncovered within her own home. Welcome to the narrative nest, where true mystery meets unforgettable storytelling. If this haunting tale holds your breath, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more gripping stories like this. They say a house keeps secrets, even when no one is speaking. The town of Hawthorne Ridge was the kind of place where everyone knew your name, your dog's name, and what time you left for work. But behind the neat fences and manicured lawns, some secrets didn't want to stay buried. It all began on a cloudy Thursday morning in 1994. Elizabeth Carter stood in the hallway outside her daughter's room, knocking gently. "Madison, honey, it's 7:30, she called softly, balancing a mug of coffee in her hand. No answer. Not unusual for a sleepy 14-year-old on a school day. She opened the door with a practiced twist of the knob and poked her head inside. The room was still. Too still. The bed was neatly made, untouched. In fact, the pale pink comforter tucked in at the edges. A half-finished homework assignment sat on the desk. Her denim jacket was still draped over the chair, but Madison Carter was nowhere to be found. Elizabeth's heart dropped. At first, she did what any mother would. She called her daughter's friends. None had seen her. She called the school. Madison hadn't arrived. Then she drove aimlessly through the streets of Hawthorne Ridge, checking the park, the library, the little pizza shop Madison liked to hang out at after school. Nothing by evening. Elizabeth was at the police station, trembling, repeating the words over and over. "My daughter is missing." Her husband, Greg Carter, Madison's stepfather, stood beside her, hand on her back, eyes serious and concerned. "We just want her back," he said to the officer, voice low, calm. Too calm. The investigation began quickly but led nowhere. There were no signs of forced entry, no strange fingerprints, no clues. It was as if Madison had simply evaporated from her room in the middle of the night. The town whispered. The neighbors speculated. Runaway, kidnapping, something worse. But time passed, and so did the urgency. Weeks turned to months. The flyers faded on telephone poles. The calls stopped coming. Even the police, overworked and underfunded, began to treat the case as cold, except for Elizabeth. She couldn't let go. Wouldn't. Every night, she sat in Madison's room, running her fingers over her daughter's books, her favorite teddy bear, the posters on her wall, hoping, waiting. And then, one night, years later, something changed. It was late, nearly 2 a.m., and Elizabeth couldn't sleep. She wandered down to the laundry room, where Greg's dirty work clothes were still piled in a basket. He'd always hated when she touched his things, insisted on doing his own laundry. But tonight, she didn't care. She lifted one of his old flannel shirts, the red one he used to wear when fixing the car, and something fell from the pocket. A folded slip of paper, yellowed with time. She picked it up, a receipt from a gas station, dated the morning after Madison disappeared. But Greg had told police he'd never left the house that day, that he stayed home helping with the search. Elizabeth stared at the slip in disbelief. Then she noticed something else, tiny, faded rust-colored stains on the sleeve of the shirt. At first, she thought it was grease, but as she held it under the light, she felt her stomach twist. That wasn't grease, it was blood. She turned the pocket inside out and found more than the receipt. A small, broken pendant, gold, heart-shaped, smeared with something dark. Madison's pendant. Elizabeth had given it to her for her 13th birthday. She hadn't seen it since. She collapsed into the chair beside the washer, shaking, heart racing. For years she had trusted Greg. He had raised Madison like his own, or so she thought. Now, a memory returned. One she had pushed away. One she hadn't allowed herself to believe. Madison's tears, late nights, closed doors. The time she said, "Mum, I don't want to be alone with him." And Elizabeth, so busy, so tired, told her daughter she was imagining things. That Greg would never hurt her, but maybe he had. The next morning, Elizabeth pretended nothing had changed. She poured Greg's coffee, kissed him on the cheek, listened to him talk about work. But inside, she was already building a plan. She began her own investigation. Quietly, carefully, she ordered DNA kits online and sent the bloodstained shirt to a private lab. She pulled Greg's old credit card statements, cross-referencing times and dates. What she found chilled her. The morning after Madison's disappearance, Greg had purchased a shovel from a local hardware store. The same morning, his credit card pinged near an abandoned lot 2 miles from their home, a lot adjacent to an old auto garage he used to work at before they were married. He had never mentioned it, not once. The final clue came from the lab. The blood on the shirt matched Elizabeth's. DNA, it was Madison's blood. And Elizabeth snapped. She drove to the old garage that same night. The place was boarded up, forgotten. Weeds grew through the cracks in the pavement. The chain-link fence hung open. She parked and walked across the gravel lot, flashlight in hand. There, behind a stack of rusted metal barrels, was disturbed earth. Just slightly, but enough, she dug. Her hands tore through the dirt. And then, the smell, it hit her like a wave. And then, the cloth, a piece of Madison's pajama top, the one with tiny stars, buried deep beneath the soil. Elizabeth didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just sat in the dirt, clutching the fabric to her chest, and whispered, "I'm so sorry." That night, she returned home quietly. Greg was asleep, snoring lightly. She watched him for a long time. Then she got to work. She staged everything carefully, put the shirt back in the laundry, left the receipt on the counter, waited until morning. When Greg walked into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes, Elizabeth smiled. "I think we should take a drive today," she said sweetly. "To the cabin, for old time's sake." Greg hesitated. Now she nodded. "You could use the break. I'll pack sandwiches." By noon, they were on the road. The cabin sat on the edge of Hawthorne Lake, secluded, surrounded by trees. It had once been a happy place for the family, a place of bonfires, fishing, and lazy summer afternoons. Now it was a trap. They arrived around 1 p.m. Elizabeth lit a fire, opened a bottle of wine, and pretended everything was normal. They ate on the porch, talked about the weather. She let him feel safe, and then, when the time was right, she handed him the shirt. "What's this?" Greg asked, confused. "You tell me," she said quietly. "Madison's blood is on it." Greg stared at her. "You're not making sense." She dropped the pendant in front of him. "This was in your pocket. You remember it, don't you? She wore it every day." Greg's face turned pale. Elizabeth stood. "I know what you did. I know where she is. I know you buried her like garbage. Greg lunged for her, but she was faster. One shot from the revolver her father had left her years ago. Clean, right through the chest. Greg fell backward, gasping, eyes wide. Dying. Elizabeth stood over him, trembling. She begged me to believe her. I didn't. So I'm the reason. She's gone. She dragged his body behind the cabin, dug a grave, the same depth, the same silence, and buried him when no one would find him. The next morning, she returned to town. She cleaned everything, burned the shirt, threw the pendant in the lake, and smiled for the first time in years. No one ever suspected a thing. The case of Madison Carter remained cold in the police files. A girl who vanished without a trace. But her mother, the one who once refused to see the truth, had finally brought justice with her own hands, and the town of Hawthorne Ridge. It forgot, moved on. But the ground beneath the old cabin never did. It remembered. It always does. 3 months had passed since Elizabeth Carter buried her husband behind the lake cabin. She went on living like nothing happened. Morning walks, book club, volunteer shifts at the local library. From the outside, Elizabeth looked like any other middle-aged woman rebuilding after tragedy. A widow now, as the story went. Greg had gone out for a drive one night and never came back. No body, no goodbye. The police filed a missing persons report, but with Greg's history of quiet disappearances, weekend getaways, long solo, fishing trips no one really pushed, not in Hawthorne Ridge, but inside Elizabeth's head. Things weren't quiet. She thought the nightmares would stop, but they didn't. Sometimes she woke, drenched in sweat, clawing at the sheets, dreaming. She was digging again. Sometimes she heard Madison's voice calling to her in the night. And sometimes, even in daylight, she imagined Greg watching her through windows, behind mirrors, under the floorboards. Grief doesn't follow rules, neither does guilt. One morning, as she watered her garden, a man appeared at the gate. He wore a suit, plain grey, creased perfectly. His hair was slicked back, and his expression unreadable. He didn't introduce himself immediately, just held up a badge. FBI ELIZABETH's stomach twisted. Elizabeth Carter, he asked. She nodded slowly. My name's Agent Thomas Rourke. I'm following up on an old case. Madison. Elizabeth kept her face calm. Of course. Come in. Inside, they sat in the kitchen. The same kitchen where Greg had once stood, sipping coffee, the morning after he'd buried her daughter. Now, it smelled of lemons and freshly baked muffins. A carefully curated lie. Agent Rourke pulled a file from his briefcase and opened it. Your daughter's case. It's never sat right with me, he said. I wasn't assigned back then. But recently, we reopened a group of cold cases in the region. Madison's stood out. Elizabeth folded her hands. That was a long time ago. He nodded. 20 years. But sometimes the answers don't surface until the rest of the world forgets. We like to believe they're still out there. Clues, mistakes, things that didn't make sense then, but might now. She sipped her tea, praying her hand wouldn't tremble. We're looking into the people around Madison in her final days, he continued. Family, teachers, neighbors, your husband, for instance. Is he still in town? Elizabeth didn't blink. Greg left a few months ago, said he needed space. I haven't heard from him since. He raised an eyebrow. That's sudden. He was struggling, she added. The grief, ... it never left him. Some days I think it killed him slowly. Agent Rourke closed the file. Did he ever talk about Madison after she disappeared? She paused, then looked out the window. Not much. He stopped saying her name after the first year, packed up her photos, said it hurt too much. Rourke stood. May I see Madison's room? Elizabeth hesitated, then nodded. She led him upstairs. The door hadn't been opened in weeks. She kept it closed now, not as a shrine, but a wound inside. The air was still. Dust floated through the shafts of light coming from the window. Her old posters remained, her desk untouched, a life frozen in time. Rourke looked around, noting everything. Then he walked to the closet. Elizabeth felt her heart jump. He opened it. Empty, just clothes on hangers, shoes neatly aligned. Then he crouched, running his fingers along the baseboard. Do you believe she ran away, Mrs. Carter? He asked without looking up. No, Elizabeth said firmly. She wouldn't have. Why? Because she was terrified. He turned to face her. Of what? Silence stretched between them. Elizabeth's voice cracked. Of Greg? That was the first time she said it aloud. Rourke studied her face for a long time. Did she ever tell you that? Elizabeth looked away. She tried. I didn't listen. He stood, his voice gentle now. Sometimes people carry guilt for things they didn't do. She shook her head. I carry it for what I refused to see. He didn't press further. Instead, he handed her a card. If you remember anything, no matter how small, call me. Then he left. Elizabeth closed the door behind him and leaned her head against the wall, heart pounding. The room felt smaller. Now, tighter, like it too was holding its breath. Downstairs, she poured herself a drink. That night, she dreamt of the garage again. But this time, when she dug into the dirt, she found not Madison, but herself. The next morning, Elizabeth drove to the cabin. She needed to check the grave. It had been raining for days, and part of her was terrified the ground had shifted, that something had surfaced, that a fox or raccoon had unearthed a clue. But when she arrived, the forest was silent. Still, she walked to the back, past the dock. Through the trees, the earth remained untouched. The shallow mound was still there, camouflaged by leaves and moss. A single stone sat atop it, like a forgotten marker. No one would find it unless they were looking, but someone might. She stood there for a long time. What if Rourke came back? What if he dug deeper? What if he somehow found the receipts she missed? The shovel Greg bought, the blood that might still be in the car trunk. What if he found her? That night, Elizabeth made a decision. She couldn't wait. She had to control the ending, just like she controlled the beginning. The next day, she visited her old friend Rachel, a retired nurse who owed her a favor. Elizabeth claimed it was for a writing project. Research, she said, for a mystery novel. They laughed. Drank wine. Rachel showed her how to mimic an accidental overdose. The kind people mistake for grief. Pills, wine, a locked room. It would be painless. Elizabeth returned home and sat in Madison's room for hours. She played the mixtape her daughter had made the summer before she vanished. Every song a memory, every lyric a regret. She wrote a note, vague but enough. Mentioned Greg, mentioned guilt. But then something happened, just before she poured the pills into her hand. The doorbell rang. She froze. One knock, then another. She opened the door. A young woman stood there. Late 20s, shoulder-length hair, worn jeans, nervous smile. Hi, she said, eyes wide. I'm sorry, you don't know me, but I think you might be my mother. The glass slipped from Elizabeth's hand. It shattered on the porch. Her knees buckled. She couldn't speak. The girl reached into her bag and pulled out a crumpled photograph. It was Madison, but older, bruised, faded, alive. For a full minute, Elizabeth couldn't breathe. She stared at the girl on her porch, this stranger with familiar eyes and trembling hands. Her world tilted. I don't understand, she whispered, backing into the doorway, gripping the frame to steady herself. Who are you? The girl stepped forward, hesitant. My name is Claire, she said, but I think my real name is Madison. Elizabeth's pulse roared in her ears. That's not possible, she said, even though every cell in her body knew otherwise. Claire Madison opened the old photograph and held it up. It was a snapshot Elizabeth hadn't seen in decades. Madison, age 12, sitting on the back porch, holding a lemonade in one hand and their old cat, Buttons, in the other. The photo had been taped to Madison's closet door once. Elizabeth staggered inside, and the girl followed. They sat in the kitchen, the same table where Elizabeth had once planned Greg's murder. Now she faced something even harder to comprehend. Tell me everything, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Claire began slowly, cautiously. My earliest memories are foggy, she said. I remember pink walls, a song about fireflies, someone brushing my hair. Then, nothing. For years, her voice cracked. I woke up in a small house, 3 states away. There was a woman, Nancy. She said she was my aunt. She said my parents died in a car accident. I believed her. I had no reason not to. But the house was strange. No neighbors, no phone, no school. Just books, home lessons, and fear. Elizabeth felt cold all over. I tried to run once, Claire said, when I was maybe 10. She locked me in the basement for a week. After that, I stopped trying. Why didn't anyone find you? Elizabeth whispered. Why didn't the police? Claire's eyes welled with tears. She never let me out. She changed my name, burned my birth certificate. I didn't even know I was adopted. That's what you call it, until she got sick last year. Elizabeth's heart thudded painfully. She had cancer, Claire said at the end. She got weird. She told me things, told me my real name, told me she wasn't my mother, that she'd been helping someone. She paused. His name was Greg. Elizabeth's world dropped out from beneath her. She said he paid her, gave me to her, told her he'd kill her if she ever told anyone. Tears spilled down Elizabeth's cheeks. She had buried Greg, but she hadn't buried her daughter. Claire looked at her, her voice breaking. I didn't believe her at first, but after she died, I searched the house. I found a box in the attic full of photos and letters from him. She pulled one out of her backpack, yellowed, written in Greg's blocky scrawl. Keep her quiet, no contact. You'll get the rest after the next year. Elizabeth covered her mouth. The evil she had killed had roots deeper than she thought. Greg hadn't just murdered Madison. He'd sold her, kept her alive, hidden. For years I thought I was crazy. Claire whispered that something was wrong with me, but I started digging. I searched the name Madison Carter online. I found the police report, your name, your face, the town. She wiped her eyes, and I came here. Elizabeth reached across the table with trembling hands. Madison, she whispered. Claire flinched slightly at the name, then nodded. I'm not sure who I am, but I think I was your daughter once. Elizabeth moved around the table and pulled her into her arms. Claire's body was stiff. Unsure, but she didn't pull away. They cried for a long time, no words, just time stolen and time returned. The next morning, Elizabeth didn't call anyone. Not the police, not the FBI, not yet. She needed time to think, to understand, to grieve the lies she'd lived for 20 years. They sat together in the living room, sipping coffee. Elizabeth showed her photos, family trips, birthdays, Madison's baby shoes. Claire asked questions, tentative, quiet. Then the knock came again, 3 sharp raps. Elizabeth opened the door to find Agent Rourke. He didn't look surprised to see Claire. In fact, he nodded slowly. "So it's true," he said. "You found her." Elizabeth's heart pounded. "You knew, I suspected," he said, stepping inside. "After we spoke, I looked deeper into Greg's finances. He made unexplained payments every 6 months, for nearly 4 years, all withdrawn in cash, disappeared into a dead-end account." He turned to Claire. "We found the woman you were living with, Nancy Boone. She was under investigation in the 90s for harboring runaways. The file was buried until last month." Claire nodded slowly, arms crossed. "Why didn't you tell me?" Elizabeth asked. "I wanted to be sure," Rourke said. "And I wanted to see if you'd admit what you did." Elizabeth froze. "What do you mean?" Rourke looked her straight in the eyes. "Greg's body, it's not where you left it." The room went silent. Claire turned pale. Elizabeth stepped back. "That's not possible." "Oh, it's very possible," he said. "We received an anonymous tip. A caller said there was something behind the Carter family cabin. We sent a team." He held up a photo. It was the grave, dug up, empty, no body. Elizabeth's breath caught in her throat. Who called it in?" "We're working on tracing it," he said. "But the question is who got there first." Claire stood slowly, confused. "You're saying he's alive?" Rourke shook his head. "We found blood, drag marks. Someone dug him up and moved him. Recently, maybe in the last week." Elizabeth swayed. That wasn't possible. She had buried him deep, piled rocks, covered the site with brush. No one knew. No one but her mind spun. And then she remembered. 3 weeks ago, a man fixing the cabin's roof. Greg's old friend from the garage days. She hadn't thought twice about it. Just routine maintenance. But maybe it wasn't. Rourke narrowed his eyes. "Is there something you need to tell me, Mrs. Carter?" She shook her head, numb lie. He turned to Claire. "For now, we'll set you up with a specialist. Help verify your identity, DNA. We'll keep this quiet. But if Greg Carter is alive..." Elizabeth's voice broke. "Then I didn't finish what I started." Rourke stared at her a moment longer, then turned and left. Claire stood in the doorway, staring into the trees. "Do you believe him?" she asked. Elizabeth didn't answer. She walked into the hallway, opened the locked drawer in the sideboard, and pulled out the revolver. She checked the barrel, still loaded. Then she whispered, more to herself than to Claire, "If he's still out there, then this isn't over." Hawthorne Ridge looked the same. Its sleepy streets, its trimmed lawns, its closed faces. But for Elizabeth Carter, everything had changed again. The daughter she thought she lost had come back from the grave, and the man she thought she buried might not have stayed there. That night, Elizabeth barely slept. Her mind spun between relief and horror. Madison Clare was alive, stolen but not destroyed. But if Greg's body was missing, that meant someone had found it, or he had never died. She replayed the shooting over and over, the way Greg fell, the blood, the silence. She had felt no pulse, no breath, and she'd buried him herself. So, who dug him up? Claire still adjusting to her old name, Madison watched her mother from the hallway, unsure how to bridge the distance between them. She had waited years to know who she was. Now she wasn't sure who she wanted to be. They were strangers bound by blood and grief, by mourning. Elizabeth had made up her mind. She needed answers, and she wasn't waiting for the FBI to hand them over. She took Claire Madison with her and drove straight to the garage Greg had worked at all those years ago, the same one he'd supposedly quit just before Madison vanished. But when they arrived, something unexpected happened. The garage wasn't closed. It had reopened, a new sign out front. Tommy's Auto Repair. She parked across the street and stared at it for a long time. "That's where he buried me," Madison said, voice tight. Or tried to. Elizabeth's grip on the wheel tightened. "That's where I started to lose you." They crossed the street together and entered. Inside, the garage smelled of oil and heat. A young man in grease-streaked jeans looked up. "Help you, Elizabeth." Looked past him. "Is Tommy in?" "Tommy's out." "I'm his son. You need a repair." "No," she said. "I'm looking for someone who used to work here. Greg Carter." The young man blinked. "Greg? Yeah, I know the name. He was here way before my time. My dad told me some stories, though." Elizabeth's heart quickened. "What kind of stories?" He scratched the back of his neck. "Not the kind you hear twice. Quiet guy. Kept to himself. One time he didn't show for 2 weeks, then came back with a busted shoulder. Said he fell off a ladder. Then he quit not long after. Just vanished." Madison stepped forward. "Was he close to anyone?" "Yeah, an older guy. Named Vince. Worked here back then. Retired now. Lives up near Redstone Hills, I think." Elizabeth nodded. "Thank you." As they turned to go, the young man added, "Hey, you wouldn't happen to be Madison Carter, would you?" Madison froze. Elizabeth turned slowly. "Why would you ask that?" He looked nervous. "Last week, someone left a note under the office. Door said if Madison Carter ever showed up here, to call a number." Elizabeth walked back, toward him. "Do you still have it?" He handed her a crumpled post-it, faded ink, a local number. No name. She tucked it in her purse. Back in the car, they didn't speak. Elizabeth drove straight to the edge of town and pulled over near the old payphone behind a gas station. She wasn't risking her home, line or cell. She dropped in a coin and dialed. 1 ring, 2 dot, then a click, silence, and then a voice. I knew she'd come back. Elizabeth said nothing. The voice continued, low, familiar, mocking. "I gave you 20 years, Liz. 20 years to forget. But you just had to go digging." Her throat dried. "You're dead," she whispered, a chuckle. "Not quite, but nice. Try. You always were better with words than weapons." Her hand shook on the receiver. "What do you want?" "I want my daughter," he said calmly. "You stole her from me." Elizabeth's fury broke. "You sold her like trash. You buried her, left me broken for 20 years. "No," he said coldly. "I saved her from you. You don't know the truth, Liz. You never did." Then the line went dead. Elizabeth slammed the receiver down. Greg was alive and watching. That night, Elizabeth took no chances. She packed bags, loaded the revolver, took Claire to a motel under a fake name. She sat with her back to the door, gun on the Nightstand, eyes on the window. Greg was smart, manipulative, dangerous, and he had help. The only question was, from who? The next morning, they drove to Redstone Hills. Vince lived in a trailer at the edge of a wooded stretch. Rusted bikes and oil cans scattered out front. He answered the door in a tank top and robe, blinking into the sun. Elizabeth didn't waste time. I need to know what you did for Greg 20 years ago. Vince narrowed his eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. Madison stepped forward. You helped him get rid of me. He went pale. I remember your voice, she added. From the truck. You told Greg it was done. That she'd never find me. Vince stared at her like he'd seen a ghost. No, that's not possible. You were supposed to be. Elizabeth slammed her hand on the doorframe. Start talking. He stepped back, shaking. I didn't know what he was doing, I swear. He just said he had a situation, needed someone to drive a kid out of state. Said it was custody stuff. The mum was dangerous. Paid me $5,000 to keep quiet. Where did you take her? Elizabeth asked. To a woman named Nancy, out in Missouri. He said she was a relative. Elizabeth's voice dropped. And you believed him? Vince shook his head. I didn't ask, Greg. He wasn't the kind of man you said no to. And after that night, I never saw him again. Until a week ago. Both women froze. He came here, Elizabeth asked. Vince nodded slowly, showed. Up in the middle of the night. Said he needed a favor. Said he gestured to Madison, was alive, and he needed to finish what got interrupted. Elizabeth's breath caught. What did you do? Madison asked. I told him to get off my land, but he laughed, said he'd see me again. Then he left. Elizabeth's blood turned cold. He was hunting them. She turned to Madison. We're not running anymore, but he's out there, she whispered. Elizabeth gripped her hand. So are we. Back at the motel, Elizabeth called Agent Rourke. She told him everything. The call, the garage, Vince, the threat. He listened, then said only one thing. Pack your things. We're putting you in federal protective custody. But before they could leave, there was a knock at the door. Not a loud one, just 3 soft taps. Elizabeth turned off the light, drew her gun. Another knock. She peered through the PEEPHOL. No one, but on the ground was a small package. She opened the door slowly, retrieved it, and locked up again. Inside, she unwrapped it with trembling hands. It was a photo, Madison, in the backyard, age 10. Greg's handwriting on the back. She always liked the garden, just like her mother. Let's meet where it started. Elizabeth turned to Madison. He's coming back to the house. The house on Willow Lane stood quiet under the weight of memory. For Elizabeth Carter, it had been more than just a home. It had been a dream once, a place where she tried to build a new life after her first husband died, a place where she painted nursery walls, baked birthday cakes, and fell for the wrong man. And now, it was the place Greg wanted them to return to. She sat in the motel room, staring at the photograph he'd left on the doorstep. Madison, at age 10, sitting cross-legged. In the backyard garden, with a popsicle melting down her fingers. Elizabeth remembered that day. It was the last summer before the silence began. Greg's message on the back was clear. Let's meet where it started. Claire Madison sat across the room, arms wrapped tightly around her knees. He's playing a game, she said, voice steady despite the storm behind her eyes. He wants to draw us out. Elizabeth nodded. And he's doing it because he knows I'll come. Agent Rourke had told them to stay put, that backup would arrive in the morning, that they were being watched, protected. But Elizabeth had no faith in that kind of protection. Greg didn't wait for permission. He made his own openings, just like before. So, shortly before midnight, she made a decision. They were going back to the house, not to run, to finish it. The sky was ink black when Elizabeth pulled the car onto their old street. The lights in the neighborhood were out, power lines down from the recent storm. Not a single porch light burned, not a single dog barked, too quiet. Elizabeth reached into her coat pocket, fingers curling round the revolver. Madison sat beside her, silent, but her hand found her mother's, and she held it tight, together. They crossed the driveway and approached the back gate. The garden had long since overgrown. Ivy crept up the fence posts. The old wind chime above the porch barely stirred. Elizabeth scanned the shadows, her breath slow and controlled. Then a sound, soft, metal scraping against wood. She raised the gun, motioned for Madison to stay low. They stepped into the kitchen, flashlights off. Just the faint light of the moon through the blinds. The door creaked, closed behind them. A shadow moved past the hallway. Elizabeth turned fast, gun aimed. "Greg," she called, voice echoing across the walls. "It's over. Come out." Silence. Then, his voice, not from the hall, from the basement. "You always were dramatic, Liz." Madison Tensed. Elizabeth moved toward the basement door. "You want to finish this," Greg called. "Come down where it began." Elizabeth opened the door slowly. The basement stairs stretched down like a throat into darkness. She remembered how Greg had once kept tools down there, how Madison had always been afraid of the basement, how she used to ask to sleep with the light on. Elizabeth descended, each step creaking underfoot. Halfway down, she paused. "You don't have to hide, Greg." "I'm not hiding," he said, from somewhere in the dark. "I've just been waiting." "For what?" "For the truth." She reached the basement floor. Madison followed quietly behind her, sticking to the shadows. Then the old overhead bulb flicked on. Greg stood across the room, alive, thinner, beard, grown, face carved by time, but unmistakably the man she had once loved and hated. He held no weapon, just stood there, hands open. "You shot me," he said. "Left me in the woods like trash. You murdered our daughter," she snapped. "You deserve worse." He laughed. "Murdered. I saved her." Elizabeth raised the gun. "You sold her." Greg's expression twisted. "She wasn't safe. Here, not with you." Madison stepped forward. "That's a lie." His eyes flicked to her, and something changed in his face. "Madison," he said, voice low, "you remember me, don't you?" "I remember everything," she said. "The pills, the basement, the screaming. I remember waking up in a strange room, calling for my mum. You didn't save me. You erased me." Greg's face contorted. "She didn't deserve you." Elizabeth's voice shook. "You convinced me she was unstable, that she was imagining things." "She was," he growled, "at first, but then she saw too much." He stepped forward, slow. "I never meant to hurt her. I just needed peace. You never let me have it." "You broke her," Elizabeth said. "And when she stopped being useful, you buried her like she was nothing." Greg's eyes burned. "I buried the threat, not her. Nancy gave her a good life." Madison whispered. "She beat me, starved me, told me my real mother didn't want me." Greg stepped closer. "That's not my fault." Elizabeth raised the gun again. Greg smiled. "You're not going to do it." Twice. But this time, it wasn't Elizabeth who pulled the trigger. It was Madison. The shot echoed through the basement like thunder. Greg stumbled backward, clutching his side, falling to the ground in a heap, blood spreading across the concrete. Elizabeth rushed to her daughter, grabbing the gun from her hands. Madison was frozen, shaking. Silent Greg coughed once. "You're just like her." Then he stopped breathing. This time, there was no doubt. He was gone. Elizabeth sank to her knees, breathing hard. It was over an hour later. Agent Rourke arrived. He didn't ask for details. Not yet. The body was taken. The house was sealed. Mother and daughter sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the sky lighten. "I didn't mean to shoot him," Madison said quietly. Elizabeth held her. "I know. I just didn't want him to speak again." "I know." Silence fell between them. Then Madison looked up. "What happens now?" Elizabeth exhaled slowly. "Now," she said, "we rebuild. Together." 6 weeks later, the snow began to fall in Hawthorne Ridge. The town looked almost beautiful beneath the frost. Quiet, peaceful, blanketed in white, like someone had tried to cover up the past. But for Elizabeth, Carter, and her daughter Madison, the past didn't stay buried under snow or time. It had to be faced. Every day since that night in the basement, Elizabeth had met with lawyers, investigators, and finally, the district attorney. She didn't lie. She didn't hide. She told them everything about Greg, about the garage, the missing years, the grave at the cabin, and the first bullet. It took 3 hours of questioning, then another week of waiting, but in the end, no. Charges were filed. The DA reviewed the evidence, the abuse, the motive, the disappearance of a minor, what Greg had done, what he had covered up, the trauma Elizabeth and Madison had endured. In the end, they ruled it an act of self-defense, a second one, but the scars it left were not legal ones. They were emotional, deeper, quiet. Madison still flinched when someone knocked on the door too hard. She kept her back to the wall in restaurants. She asked questions twice. She still hesitated when Elizabeth called her sweetheart, and Elizabeth. She lived with the weight of years wasted. She had once silenced her daughter's cry for help. Now she was learning how to listen again. One evening, they stood in the backyard garden, the place where Madison had once played with popsicles and picked weeds, long before the shadows came. The soil was frozen now, but Elizabeth had begun planting new bulbs, daffodils, tulips, and wildflowers that would bloom in spring. Madison helped her, kneeling in the cold dirt, sleeves pulled up. "You think they'll grow?" she asked Elizabeth. Looked at her. "Yes," she said softly, "but not overnight." Madison nodded. "That's okay. I don't want fast. I want real." They sat in the grass, dirt on their palms, silence between them. Then Madison said, "I want to go to the police." Elizabeth turned slowly. "What for?" "Not about Greg, about others, girls like me." She paused. "I think there are more." Elizabeth felt a chill deeper than the wind. "You want to tell your story?" Madison looked up. "I want to make it mean something." So they did. 2 weeks later, a formal report was filed with the FBI. Madison gave them everything: names, locations, descriptions of Nancy Boone's house, of people who came and went. Her testimony opened an old case file, then another, and another. By spring, there were arrests, in 2 states. A small trafficking network, long dormant, brought back to light because one girl survived, because she spoke and her mother listened. The local newspaper printed a small article, cold case, warmed by unexpected return. Hawthorne Ridge woman found alive after 20 years. No details, no names, just a note that the family had reunited under extraordinary circumstances and requested privacy as they heal. But healing was a long road. One day, Madison found her old journals, half-torn, covered in sketches. She read through them quietly, then left them on the kitchen table. Elizabeth picked one up. Inside was a note, written by a child's hand. I think one day my mum will find me, and I hope I'm still someone she wants. Elizabeth sat with it for hours. Then she wrote her own note and tucked it inside. I didn't find you, you found me, and I've never been more proud of anyone in my life. They kept the house on Willow Lane, not because it was easy, but because it was real, and the garden, once overgrown and forgotten, bloomed brighter that spring than ever before. Yellow, purple, red. Life bursting up from where the past had once tried to bury it. Sometimes the neighbors saw Elizabeth and Madison sitting together on the porch laughing, reading, drinking tea. Sometimes they planted new flowers. Sometimes they just sat in silence and watched the wind move through the trees. And on one particular afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Madison turned to her mother and said, I don't want to be afraid anymore. Elizabeth smiled.